Welcome back to the channel. This is a little A5 5-speed out of a Colorado. So these come behind the little 4-cylinder Colorados. This one's 2-wheel drive. And apparently they're a little bit sadistic and they like to be abused, or at least they tolerate being abused a little bit. So with the help of FABbot, they make an adapter so you can mount this thing to a small block Chevy or an LS motor. These are also found, or a variant of this is also found in a Pontiac Solstice. And that's probably where they originally started adapting these to fit LSs when everyone started swapping those. But anyway, let's see what it takes to get this thing set up to go behind a small block Chevy. I actually don't have a use for this right now, but I'm going to keep my eyes open for something. Okay, so here's what you get with the kit. And they actually gave me a card, LS to CD009 adapter. This isn't what this is, but I'm actually very curious to what a CD009 is. And if it's any good to go behind an LS. I'm really curious what that is. I'm going to have to look that up. But anyway, so here's the bell housing. I believe this is just a GM bell housing from like a 4L60 or 4L80 or something like that. There's the adapter that they machine. Pretty heavy piece. That looks like a pilot bearing. That looks like a shim for the throwout, which they also give you. A bolt kit, some stainless lines, copper, that's a sealing washer there. That probably goes behind there. And then this line, and then some more bolts. So that's what they give you. I don't have any directions. I also got the clutch and the flywheel as well. One thing I did want to point out, when I was taking the original bell housing off, these two bolts had a ton of what looked like a green thread sealer in them. And so I don't know, they don't look like they go to anything. I'm not sure why they had sealer on them and the rest of them were just normal. And they came right out, but these two were kind of a pain in the butt to get out. I was afraid I was going to pull the threads out, but I didn't. But anyway, if you are taking them out, use caution. The factory bell housing, for some reason, those two bolts were a little stuck on there. So let's see what happens when we put this on here. Fits this way. There's a little dowel. So one of the dowels stayed stuck in the bell housing that I took off, so I had to remove that using a spring tools from the inside. Then I put it in with our lead hammer, and then I'll tap the adapter on with the lead hammer, and we'll move along. I did put Vaseline on the surfaces, and that will kind of seal out moisture and stuff from getting in between there, and keep the aluminum from corroding and the bolts from corroding and stuff. But it doesn't make a huge mess like using RTV or anything like that would. Okay, so we're going to torque all these to 40 foot-pounds. Okay. Interesting. So there's still a seal in there. So these are crochet hooks. They work really good for this exact situation. So you can buy a whole bunch of those things for like $5 in all sorts of different sizes. So they're meant for doing crochet, but they work really good for pulling seals out like I just did. I'll leave a link in the description below for that set that I have. It came with like 1 million of them. So now we push this in like that, and then put a roll pin back in. 7/16, I think. Yep. Okay. All right, so this is all pretty self-explanatory. The only thing that's a little odd is the bleeder screw, when you remove it, is sealed by a taper. And now it's going to be sealed by that copper washer that was in that bag. It's a little concerning to me because the copper or the throwout bearing itself wasn't meant for having a seal, like a copper washer style seal. It'll probably work fine. There's not a ton of pressure in these systems, but it's one of those things you're going to want to make sure you get that good and tight, so that washer has as best of a chance as possible for sealing up against that slave cylinder. And of course, don't forget that spacer that they give you. I almost did forget that. The bleeder is on the bottom, which is a little odd. And then these are going to route up just like this after we tighten this guy on there. So, but before I do that, I am going to put our anti-seize on there since we're threading into aluminum. Okay. Ooh, pretty tight. There's no way I'm going to be able to get that bell housing on there, I don't think. Or maybe I can, I don't know. We'll see. It's going to have to slip over that. Those go like that. Oops, helps I grab the right one. There it is. So that's what it ends up looking like. Something like that. We'll be able to fish these in and out. As long as they're in there, it's all that matters right now. We want more space than. So I don't know how I missed the part filming, but one of the bolts that they gave me, their supplier gave them one that had a different sized head. It was the right bolt, but the head was different than all the others. So I just went and found a bolt, another 10.9 bolt that matched. Other than the color. The color didn't match. Now here's our funky bolt, but at least it's less funky than the other. At least it has the same size head, and it's still a 10.9, so we should be good. So now we torque those, but it gives you an idea of how you route those lines. Obviously you don't want them pulled or kinked, but that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. The only thing I don't really like is that the bleeder's the bottom line, having it upside down like that. But it is what it is. You got to do what you got to do when you're converting stuff sometimes. And it just doesn't, it's not really too feasible to have those pointing the other way without cutting into the bell housing itself, which you don't want to do. So that's why they chose to do it that way. So you just have to fight with bleeding it. But we'll reverse bleed it when we go to put this thing in, which means we're actually going to feed it from the bottom line. We'll pump the fluid and fill the master cylinder from the bleeder line. So we're doing it backwards. So we're not pumping the pedal and bleeding it or doing anything traditionally that way. So it'll work out pretty good. So anyway, that's that. So now we'll just torque those bell housing bolts. So these guys are 38 foot-pounds. Now it'd be a real bitch if these leaked in there. So I might throw a wrench on them since we were doing that on the table and make sure we got these AN style flares tight, because otherwise they're pulling the transmission back out, which is pretty frustrating. That one felt good. And that felt good. And what I'm mostly worried about is that one with the copper seal, because the surfaces aren't machined for a copper seal like that. Like on your brakes, it would have a bunch of lines. So when you tighten that together, that copper would deform into those lines that they have going around it, and those are just smooth. So it's not ideal, but there's not as much pressure in these hydraulic throwout bearings as you would think. It's not nearly as much as a brake line would have, which is why they're plastic. Like this Colorado had a plastic line. And so, I mean, I don't know what the pressure is, maybe like 200 PSI max on it. So the other thing you got to watch for is make sure that these lines are free in there and that you didn't pinch them. That's something that you would probably catch, but it's something that, like, if it were stuck, you wouldn't think too much of it either, because thinking it may be getting squished a little bit in there, but they should move in and out like no problem. And one thing I'm going to point out, if you guys are an old school and you're looking to do this, this is the pilot bearing for a small block Chevy, believe it or not. I'll show you here. So this is an old 010 350. And you can see there, you actually have two pilots. Normally you'd put your pilot bearing in there, but this is where this one will install, is that outer surface there. So that actually goes in there, like that. So anyway, so that might clear that up, because that is a little different than what traditionally you would be putting in there. All right, so now I'm going to clean up my wiring. I'm putting a weather pack connector on, and then I'm going to wrap it in cloth tape. And then I heat the ends of the cloth tape, and it really gets them to adhere in so they don't come unraveled later. Also, I removed the oxygen sensor wire that was going to an oxygen sensor on the Colorado. So once I finish this up, which is just in a second here, I am going to show you the transmission. And that's great, but what would be really nice is if I would show you some dimensions. So we're going to do that here. I'm going to pause this video and we'll put some dimensions up on the screen that might be critical for your installer for the scenario you want. Starting off, it's 32.5 inches long. That's from the face of the bell housing to the tail housing. Then it's about 10 inches wide or so, and it seems to be pretty symmetrical with the bell housing itself. The shifter is dead center. It's 24.25 inches from the bell housing to the center of the shifter. And then it's 36 inches long, plus or minus, with the yoke pulled out to a good distance to hook to your driveline. So you should be right around there with your driveline length. And then lastly, but I'm sure I missed something, 24.75, that's to the bolts for the transmission mount on the transmission itself. So hopefully that was helpful. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.